Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. Today we will be focusing on lesson number 2 from Ahsanul Qawaaid. Right, lesson number 2 focuses on how the letters look when they appear at the beginning of a word, because obviously letters will be combined to form words. So this lesson really focuses on helping you to identify what the letters will actually look like when they are joined to another letter, and when the letters appear at the beginning of a word. The letters look slightly different when they appear in the middle or at the end of a word. This lesson focuses on letters that appear at the beginning of a word. So you have ba, and this is what ba looks like when it appears at the beginning of a word. Ta, ta. Again, how it looks at the beginning of a word. Again, with this lesson, although we've covered it in lesson 1, what you need to do is you need to be able to recognize the letters and how they look like at the beginning of a word, but also reinforce and recap on whether the letter is a full mouth letter or an empty mouth letter. Have a think about where these letters originate from. It's very important that you keep on repeating this over and over again throughout the qaida, so that you're secure in this. Okay, so ba, ba, ta, ta, tha, tha, jim, jim, ha, ha, kho, kho, dal, dal, dhal, dhal, za, za, sin, sin, sheen, sheen, صاد صاد ضاد ضاد عين عين غين غين فاء فاء قاف قاف كاف كاف لام لام ميم ميم نون نون ها ها Hamza, Hamza, Ya, Ya. Okay, so if you look at Ba, how would you recognize Ba? With the dot at the bottom. One single dot at the bottom of Ba. Ta has 2 dots at the top. Tha has 3 dots at the top. However, there is another letter with 3 dots at the top, which is Sheen. So the difference between Tha and Sheen are these shark-like curves. That's how I remember the difference between Tha and Sheen. Whereas Tha is just straight at the bottom. Jim, Jim, 1 dot. When you actually look at the letter, there's a dot in the middle. However, when the jim appears at the beginning of a word, the dot appears at the bottom, not in the middle of the letter. So it's, when you look at the letter itself, it's in the middle. However, when it appears like this at the beginning of a word, it will appear at the bottom. This is the shape that you need to look out for, this shape here, because this is the shape of jim, ha, and kha. All 3 are exactly the same. The only difference is the dots. So jim has a dot at the bottom, ha has no dots, and kha has a dot at the top. So you really need to familiarize yourself with this shape. You have the dal. Now dal has a slight tail at the front. Now, I'd just like to point out to you that this is not what dal will look like. Although this lesson predominantly focuses on letters and how they will look at the beginning of a word, the dal, this is not how dal is written when it appears at the beginning of a word. This is how dal is written when it comes after another letter. It does not look like this when it appears at the beginning of a word. It looks like this when it appears in the middle or after a letter. The dal will look like the original dal if it appears at the beginning of a word. That's exactly the same with dhal. Dal and dhal are empty mouth letters. Dhal, this is how it will look at the beginning of a word, and this is how it will look in the middle of a word or at the end of a word. Just bear that in mind, please, with these two letters. Za, za. Again, za, I would say the same thing. You might see the letter za written like this or like this. It's not necessarily always written like this if it's at the beginning of a word. It can also be written like this, just to clarify, because what you read in books isn't always explained, and sometimes we can misunderstand things if we aren't taught it properly or if we don't learn it correctly. So za will look like this or like this at the beginning of a word. Sin looks like that individually, but when it appears at the beginning of a word, it will look like this with the teeth at the bottom, the two teeth. Sheen, 3 dots. Sin, no dots, with the teeth at the bottom. That's the difference between the sheen and the tha. And you have the sad. That's how it looks at the beginning of a word. Dad. At the beginning of a word, it looks like that. The difference between sad and dad is that dad has a dot and sad has no dots. You have the ayn. This is how ayn looks at the beginning of a word. Now, some people get mixed up with this and they think that the ayn looks like a hamza. The hamza will look like this if it appears at the beginning and if it's joined onto another letter. This is how the hamza will look, a hamza on top of this mark here. Whereas an ayn looks very different. There are similarities between the ayn and the hamza, but there are lots of differences, and you need to familiarize yourself with the differences as well. Ghain, full mouth letter, this is how the ghain looks. Now the difference between the ayn and the ghain is just 1 dot, but the shape are the same. Fa, 1 dot. This is how it looks at the beginning of a word. Qaf, 2 dots with a head. Fa, 1 dot on a head. That circle there, to me, looks like a head. And that's how I remember it. So on the head, there's a dot. On this one, on the head, there are 2 dots. Kaf, although written like this with this little line, this curved line on top, when you actually write it and join it onto another letter, that disappears, and this is how the kaf looks at the beginning of a word. Lam looks like that. So just a straight line, but it will be joined onto another letter. Alif will not look like that because alif will never join onto a letter after it. It might be joined onto a letter before it, like lam alif or mim alif or ba alif, but it will not join onto a letter after it. So that's why I know this is a lam, because it's got a curve at the bottom, which is showing me that it's ready to join onto another letter. Alif won't have that. Alif will stand by itself. Mim, mim, just a small head at the bottom with a tail, a short tail. Noon, noon. Now be careful with noon, dhal and za, because they all have 1 dot at the top and they look very similar. However, there is a big difference as well. You can see the dal, which has got a pointy bit at the back there, and there's a pointy bit there at the back there. Noon doesn't have that. Noon goes straight down and then across, whereas this one is angled diagonally. These are usually angled diagonally, and the noon is what you call a horizontal and a vertical, so it's perpendicular, almost creating a 90-degree right angle there. Ha, ha, deep, ha. This is what it looks like with the tail after it. Hamza, hamza. So it looks the same, but just this bit at the bottom appears when you join it onto the letter, when you join it onto a letter after it. And ya, ya, 2 dots at the bottom indicate that it is a ya. Exercise. So after practicing this and going through it thoroughly, recognizing the letters and also thinking about where they originate from, if they are full mouth or empty mouth. For instance, if I just scan through empty mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, full mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, empty mouth, full mouth, full mouth, empty mouth, full mouth, empty mouth, full mouth, empty 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 mouth. So you need to be really confident and know very quickly which letters are full mouth, which letters are empty mouth, and where they originate from. You can move on to the exercise. The way I would do the exercise is I would cover up the top bit the lesson. I would cover that up and try to identify the letters and then referring back to the lesson, and then covering it up again, trying to identify the letter and then referring back to the lesson above. And that's how I would learn this lesson or teach it to younger children. I hope all that makes sense. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. For the benefit of those who aren't 100% sure, I will go over this exercise so that you can test yourself and see if you are correct. So you've got Ghain, Lam, Hamza, Ba, Sad, Kha, Fa, Tha, Ha, Noon. See, Noon, straight line down and straight line across, creating a right angle. It's not a Za or a Dhal. It's a Noon. Dal, Qaf, Jim, Ain, Ta, Dad, Ya, Ba, Mim, Ya. It looks a bit like a Ra, but I know it's not a Ra because it's got two dots at the bottom. Lam, I know this is not an alif because of the curve at the bottom. Lam, Ain, Tha, Ra, Sad, Kaf, Ghain, Sheen, Dhal, Hamza. Fa, I know this is not a wow because it's got a dot at the top. Za, Ha, Sin, Qaf, Dad. Okay, so now this page is a continuation of exercise and lesson number 2. However, there is a slight difference here. So now we've got two letters. There is a slight break in between, but in the Quran or in a proper piece of text, you will not find that break in between. Can you see where there is a break in between the two letters? That's just to make it easy for you to understand. That's not how it will look in the Quran. In the Quran, the letters will be completely joined. So let's go over these. So you've got Ba, Sin, Ta, Ra, Ta, Mim, Jim, Lam, Ha, Jim, Kha, Ta, Sin, Dal, Sheen, Ra, Ain, Dhal, Sad, Ba, Dad, Dal, Ghain, Mim, Fa, Dhal, Qaf, Lam, Kaf, Noon, Lam, Mim, Noon, Kaf, Ha, Lam, Hamza, Dhal, Ya, Ra, Tha, Jim, Noon, Ta, Tha, Ba, Noon, Dha. Right, just focusing on this one here, Dhal. I spoke about this in the previous lesson where I said that the Dhal, this is how it looks when it comes after a letter, and this is a good example here. So the Dhal will not look like that if it's at the beginning of a word, but when it comes after a letter at the end of a word or in the middle of a word, this is how it will look. Similarly, Dal at the end of a word. This is not how Dal will look if it was at the beginning. It will look, Dal and Dhal will look exactly the same as they are in the alphabet if they appear at the beginning. If they come after a letter, this is how they will look. I hope all that made sense. Inshallah, we'll be making another video on lesson number 3. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to understand the Quran, act upon it and practice upon it and teach others, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.